There's a peculiar phenomenon that occurs in human consciousness, and most people go through their entire lives without ever recognizing it. It's so fundamental, so pervasive that it becomes invisible, like the air we breathe or the water a fish swims in. And that phenomenon is this. Nearly everything you do, nearly every decision you make, nearly every word you speak is filtered through a question that runs constantly in the background of your mind. That question is, what will they think of me? Now, you may not consciously ask this question. In fact, you probably believe you're acting independently, making your own choices, living your own life. But observe yourself carefully. Watch yourself in conversation. Notice how you choose your words, how you modulate your voice, how you present your opinions. Notice how much energy you expend trying to create a particular impression, trying to manage how others perceive you. This need for approval begins early. Of course, as children, we quickly learn that our survival depends on pleasing the adults around us. A baby cries and mother comes. This is the first lesson in cause and effect, in the power of gaining another's attention and approval. As we grow, the pattern becomes more sophisticated. We learn to smile at the right moments, to say the things that earn praise, to hide the parts of ourselves that meet with disapproval or punishment. And gradually, imperceptibly, we construct a false self, a performing self, a self that exists primarily in the eyes of others. The tragedy is that we forget this is what we're doing. We identify completely with this performing self and mistake it for who we really are. We become so skilled at the performance that we no longer know where the performance ends and our authentic being begins. If indeed there's anything left of that authentic being at all. Now, what I want to talk about today is what happens when you stop this exhausting performance. What happens when you cease to seek the approval of others? And I want to be very clear about what I mean by this, because it's easily misunderstood. I'm not talking about becoming rude or inconsiderate. I'm not suggesting you should deliberately offend people or disregard their feelings. I'm not advocating for selfish behavior or cruelty. What I'm talking about is something far more subtle and far more profound. I'm talking about the moment when you stop organizing your entire existence around the question of whether others approve of you. This is a revolutionary shift in consciousness, because when you're constantly seeking approval, you're not really living your own life. You're living a kind of reflection of what you imagine others want you to be. And the exhausting thing is that these others are themselves seeking approval. So you're trying to please people who are trying to please people who are trying to please people in an endless hall of mirrors where nobody is actually home. Let me describe what this approval seeking looks like in practice. You're at a gathering and someone asks your opinion about something, politics, religion, art, whatever it might be. Now, if you're honest with yourself, you'll notice that before you answer, there's a split-second calculation. You're quickly assessing the room, trying to determine what opinion will make you look good, what answer will earn respect or agreement or admiration. You're not asking yourself what you actually think. You're asking yourself what you should say to create the desired impression, or consider your work, your career. How much of what you do is genuinely interesting to you? And how much is performed for the approval of employers, colleagues, society at large? How many people are in careers they don't enjoy, living lives that don't fit them, all because they're trying to meet someone else's expectations, parents perhaps, or some abstract notion of success that they've absorbed from their culture? Or look at relationships. How often do people stay in friendships or romantic partnerships, not because these relationships nourish them, but because leaving would invite disapproval? How much suffering is endured? How much authenticity is sacrificed, all to avoid the judgment of others? The need for approval is a kind of prison. And like most prisons, it's largely invisible to those trapped inside it. You don't see the bars because you've been looking through them your whole life. They've become part of the landscape, part of the assumed structure of reality. But here's what's extraordinary. The moment you recognize this prison, the moment you truly see it for what it is, something begins to shift. And the moment you stop seeking approval, not as a rebellious act, not as a way of proving something, but simply because you see the futility and exhaustion of it, everything changes. Let me tell you what I mean by everything changes. First, you discover who you actually are. Not who you think you should be, not who others want you to be, but who you actually are beneath all the layers of performance and pretense. And this discovery is often surprising, because the authentic self is quite different from the performing self. The authentic self has different interests, different values, different desires than the self you've been presenting to the world. The authentic self might enjoy things you've been pretending not to enjoy. It might be drawn to paths you've been avoiding because they didn't seem respectable or impressive enough. It might have opinions that don't fit neatly into the categories that would win approval. When you stop seeking approval, you give yourself permission to discover these things. You can finally ask yourself, what do I actually enjoy? What actually interests me? What do I actually think about this? Not what should I enjoy or what would make me look intelligent to think, but what's actually true for me. This is tremendously liberating, because you've been carrying around all these shoulds and oughts, all these ideas about who you're supposed to be, and suddenly you can put them down. You can stop performing. You can stop managing your image. You can simply be. Now, When this happens, something remarkable occurs in your relationships with others. The people who were drawn to your performing self, the people who approved of you as long as you played the role they wanted you to play, these people tend to fall away, and this can be painful. You may lose friendships, even family relationships. People may express disappointment, confusion, even anger. You've changed, they'll say, often with a tone of accusation. And it's true, you have changed, or rather you've stopped pretending. You've stopped contorting yourself to fit their expectations. And they experience this as betrayal because, in a sense, you've broken an unspoken contract. The contract was, I'll approve of you as long as you continue to be the person I want you to be. But here's what's extraordinary. At the same time that some relationships fall away, others deepen. Because when you stop performing, when you stop seeking approval, you become authentic. And authenticity has a magnetic quality. People who are themselves seeking authenticity, who are tired of superficial relationships and social games, are drawn to it. You begin to attract people who appreciate you for who you actually are, not for the mask you wear. And these relationships are profoundly different from approval-based relationships. They're based on genuine recognition, on actually seeing and being seen. They're nourishing rather than exhausting because you're not constantly working to maintain an image. You can relax, you can be yourself. Moreover, when you stop seeking approval, you stop being manipulable. Think about how much of advertising, politics, social pressure operates through the mechanism of approval and disapproval. Buy this product and you'll be admired. Adopt this opinion and you'll be respected. Behave this way and you'll fit in. The entire machinery of social control depends on people desperately seeking approval. When you're no longer seeking approval, this machinery loses its power over you. You can't be controlled through shame or the promise of status. You are free to make decisions based on what's actually true for you, what actually serves your well-being and the well-being of others, rather than what will earn you gold stars from some authority or peer group. This doesn't mean you become indifferent to others. In fact, paradoxically, when you stop seeking approval, you often become more genuinely considerate, because consideration that comes from seeking approval is really just another form of manipulation. You're being nice because you want something in return, even if what you want is just a positive opinion. But consideration that comes from simply recognizing others as fellow beings, not as sources of approval or disapproval, is authentic kindness. Now, I want to talk about the fear that arises when you contemplate stopping the approval-seeking behavior. Because there is fear, tremendous fear. The mind presents you with catastrophic scenarios. If I stop trying to please people, I'll be alone, I'll be rejected, I'll be cast out, I'll lose everything. And there's a reason for this fear. It goes back to our evolutionary history, to a time when being cast out of the tribe meant death. To be alone was to be vulnerable to predators, to starvation, to the elements. So the fear of disapproval is ancient and deep. It feels like a matter of survival. But here's what you must understand. That ancient fear is no longer relevant in the way it once was. You're not going to die if some people disapprove of you. You're not going to be cast out into the wilderness to face predators. The worst that can happen is that some people won't like you. And when you really examine this, when you really look at the prospect of some people not liking you, you realize it's not actually catastrophic. In fact, it's inevitable. No matter what you do, no matter how much you perform, some people won't like you anyway. There's a wonderful freedom in accepting this. Some people won't like you, and that's perfectly fine. You don't need universal approval. You don't need everyone to think well of you. You just need to live authentically and find the people who resonate with that authenticity. Let me share something from my own experience. For many years, particularly in my younger days, I was enormously concerned with what people thought of me. As someone interested in philosophy and religion, as someone who eventually became a teacher of sorts, I was constantly aware of my reputation. I wanted to be respected, to be taken seriously, to be admired for my knowledge and insight. And this concern shaped everything I did. It shaped what I wrote, what I said in lectures, even how I dressed and spoke. I was performing the role of the wise teacher, the knowledgeable philosopher. And it was exhausting, though I didn't fully recognize how exhausting until something shifted. The shift came gradually through my study of Zen, through my own meditation practice, through simply growing older and warier of the performance. I began to care less about approval. I began to say what I actually thought rather than what would sound impressive. I began to admit when I didn't know something rather than pretending to knowledge I didn't have. I began to laugh at myself, to show my flaws and uncertainties. And do you know what happened? Some people were indeed disappointed. Some people decided I wasn't as wise as they'd thought, wasn't worthy of respect after all. But others, and these were the people who mattered, appreciated the authenticity. They found it refreshing. They felt they could finally relate to me as a human being rather than as an image or an authority. More importantly, I felt free. I could breathe. I could explore ideas without worrying whether they were respectable. I could admit confusion, doubt, not knowing. I could simply be myself with all my contradictions and imperfections. And this freedom was worth infinitely more than any approval I'd been seeking. Now let me speak about what happens in that moment when you stop seeking approval. And I do mean a moment, though it's also a process. There's often a specific moment of recognition, a shift in consciousness where you suddenly see the whole game clearly. You see how much energy you've been expending on managing others' opinions. You see how futile it is, how exhausting, how it keeps you from actually living. In that moment, something drops away. The burden drops away and there's a tremendous lightness, a sense of relief. It's as if you've been carrying a heavy load up a mountain your whole life and suddenly you realize you can put it down. Nobody actually requires you to carry it. You were carrying it only because you thought you had to. This doesn't mean the old patterns instantly disappear. The habit of seeking approval is deeply ingrained. You'll still catch yourself doing it. Still notice that split-second calculation before you speak. Still feel that pang of anxiety when someone disapproves. But now you see it happening, you're aware of it, and awareness itself begins to dissolve the pattern. You start to notice, there it is again. I was about to modify what I was going to say because I was worried about what they'd think. And in noticing it, you have a choice. You can continue with the modification or you can take a breath and say what you actually mean. Each time you choose authenticity over approval seeking, the pattern weakens a little more. And as the pattern weakens, everything does shift. Your relationships shift as I've described. Your work shifts. You may find yourself drawn to different kinds of work, or approaching your current work in a different way. Your daily experience shifts because you're no longer expending so much energy on impression management. You have energy available for actually experiencing life, for being present, for engaging genuinely with whatever arises. Even your sense of self shifts, because when you're constantly seeking approval, your sense of self is fundamentally unstable. It depends on others' opinions, which are changeable and often contradictory. One person approves, another disapproves, and you're torn between them, not knowing who you are. But when you stop seeking approval, you discover a more stable sense of self. Not a fixed, permanent self, but a sense of being that doesn't depend on external validation. This is what the Eastern traditions have been pointing to all along. The Deists speak of wu, effortless action, acting from your true nature rather than from learned patterns and social conditioning. The Buddhists speak of dropping the ego, which is largely composed of these approval-seeking patterns and the images we present to others. The Hindus speak of discovering the Atman, the true self beneath all the layers of social identity. When you stop seeking approval, you're not becoming a different person. You're stopping being all the false persons you've been pretending to be. You're allowing what you actually are to emerge and express itself naturally. Now, I want to address a question that often arises. But don't we need some social harmony? Don't we need to consider others? Won't everyone just become selfish and inconsiderate if they stop caring what others think? This question misunderstands what I'm saying. I'm not suggesting you become indifferent to others' well-being. I'm not advocating for selfish disregard of how your actions affect people. What I'm saying is that you can be genuinely considerate without seeking approval. In fact, approval seeking often makes people less genuinely considerate because they're focused on managing impressions rather than actually being present with others. Real consideration comes from empathy, from recognizing others as conscious beings like yourself, from naturally wanting to act in ways that don't cause unnecessary harm. This has nothing to do with seeking approval and everything to do with basic human decency and awareness. Moreover, much of what passes for social harmony is really just collective pretense. Everyone performing for everyone else. Nobody saying what they actually think or feel or carefully maintaining acceptable facades. This isn't genuine harmony. It's a kind of mutual deception. Real harmony, real community can only be built on authenticity. It requires people who are willing to be real with each other even when that's uncomfortable. So when you stop seeking approval, you're not destroying the possibility of genuine relationship and community. You're creating it. You're inviting others into authentic connection rather than the shadow play of social performance. Let me end with this. The moment you stop seeking approval is the moment you begin to live. Not the life you think you should live. Not the life others want you to live, but your actual life. The one that's been waiting for you all along. Beneath all the performance and pretense. And when you begin to live this life, you discover something wonderful. You discover that you're enough. Not perfect. You'll still have flaws, still make mistakes, still have struggles and uncertainties. But you're enough. You don't need anyone's approval to validate your existence. You're already valid. You were always valid. You just couldn't see it while you were so busy trying to earn what you already had. This is the great shift from seeking to being, from performing to simply existing, from the exhausting effort of trying to become acceptable to the profound peace of recognizing that you already are. This is freedom. This is what it means to finally come home to yourself. Thank you.